Okay, page 157. We're at the top. Tim and Sam are talking. They're in the barn. And Sam had just said that father was selling beef to the British. No, he wasn't, Mrs. Tim talking. He was selling beef to Mr. Bogardus. He didn't care who bought it. What difference does it make? It was getting to the British. It comes down to the same thing. He was selling beef to the enemy. Are you against father, Sam? No, but father's against me. He ran away, he said. He told me to leave. I didn't want to fight with him, but he threw me out. He cried when you left, I said. I know, you told me that before. Don't think I was happy about leaving. I felt terrible. I remember running down that road in the rain, being mad and cursing him for what he did. But all the while I was cursing, I kept remembering things like our trips over to Verplank's Point, and him taking me down to New Haven to get admitted to Yale, and buying me new clothes there, and everything else. And finally I stopped cursing, and I just felt terrible. Wished we hadn't fought. But it was too late. That's 2 years ago, Tim. Okay, wow. Sam's been gone for 2 years. I didn't realize that much time had passed. Don't you feel bad about father being in prison, Sam? Yes. He didn't say anything for a minute. As a matter of fact, I thought I might be able to get him out. I even went to see General Arnold about it. But I couldn't even find out where he is. Nobody knows. Well, maybe you can try again. Tim, I don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm too tired. He was tired, all right. Can't you write somebody a letter? Tim, I don't want to argue about it anymore. Well, stop arguing if you promise to try to get father out. I can't get him out. I tried. But you can try again, he said. For God's sakes, Tim. I shut up. I didn't want to spoil it by having a fight. We stared at each other for a minute. Then he said, Can you get me something to eat? I'll tell Mother you're here. I slipped across the barnyard, through the kitchen, and into the tavern. The generals and their aides had finished eating and were drinking rum and water and talking over plans. Mother gave me a cross look. Where have you been? There's something wrong with old Prue's leg. I think you'd better come out and look at it. It'll have to wait, she said. I think you ought to look at it now, Mother. It wasn't like me to insist on anything that way, and she got the idea. All right, just a moment, she said. See if the gentlemen need more rum. I filled the glasses and helped her clear the plates, and then we went out through the kitchen into the barnyard. What's happened, Tim? Sam's in the barn. She stopped dead. Sam's here? It's where I've been. Looking for him. I thought he might be here with General Arnold. She started to run, but then she thought better of it and walked steadily out there. When Sam saw her, he came a little way out of the barn shadows. For a moment, he and Mother stared at each other, and then they began to hug. And I came up and put my arms around both of them and hugged them together. Then Mother pushed back and stared at him. I haven't seen you for 2 years, Sam, she said. He grinned. Do I look different? Dirtier, she said. He laughed. Is that all? No, older. She said, You've gotten older. Tim has too. I hardly recognized him. He's had to grow up fast, Mother said. He didn't have much choice. I thought you'd all be mad at me, he said. I didn't know if you'd be speaking to me. Oh, we're willing to speak to you all right, she said. We need you back home. Hey, Tim, I thought you were going to bring me something to eat. He was trying to change the subject. I forgot, he said. Tim, get your brother some bread and a piece of that ham that's hanging in the kitchen. I went back to the kitchen and got the food. I knew they were going to have an argument. When I got back to the barn, Mother was saying, Sam, we don't even know if he's alive. You have to come home now. We need you. That was the first time I'd ever heard her admit that Father might be dead. Sam winced. It hurt him. I don't think he's dead, Mother. I handed him the food. Oh, lovely, he said. Thanks. He tore off a piece of the ham with his teeth and then stuffed a hunk of bread into his mouth. I said, Is that the way they eat in the army? I knew it wasn't going to do any good to argue with Sam. He wasn't going to change his mind. I didn't want Mother to have a fight with him. He swallowed. I guess we figure if we're lucky enough to have anything to eat, we don't care how we eat it. But Mother wouldn't give up. Sam, you have to come home. We need you. Your people have taken Father from us. They'll have to give us you in return. Mother, I can't come home. That's desertion. They hang people for that. When is your enlistment up, Sam? He frowned. In 2 months. But I'm going to re-enlist. No, Sam, you have to come home. Mother, I said, don't argue with him. You can't make him change his mind. He's just being stubborn, she said. Mother, he said, I came to pay a visit, and first Tim badgered me about Father, and now you're badgering me about coming home. I can't come home until it's over. It's my duty to stay and fight. You have a duty to your family, too. My duty to my country comes first. Please, everybody, stop arguing with me. And get killed in the meantime? She said. Maybe, he said. We were quiet for a moment. Then he said, we've made a promise, a group of us, not to quit until the redcoats are beaten. Made a pledge to each other. Oh, Sam, that's a foolish promise. I said, Mother, stop arguing with him. You're both fools, she said. He was getting angry. For God's sakes, Mother. People are out there dying for you. Well, they can stop dying, Mother said. I don't need anybody's death. Leave him alone, Mother, he said. He ain't going to change his mind. He isn't going to change his mind. We were silent, and I knew she was trying to accept it. All right, she said finally. All right. We changed the subject. We talked about the crops and about people, and he gave us a message to take to Betsy Reed. We'll probably be moving out soon, he said. I don't know. Tell her I'll try to see her if I can. I better go now before somebody misses me. He hugged Mother, and then he hugged me, and turned and slipped through the rain and the night out of the barnyard. I watched him go. Knowing that we might never see him again. And we went back into the tavern. I had a funny feeling about seeing Sam. It wasn't just that he was more grown up, or that I was more grown up. It was something else. For the first time in my life, I knew that Sam was wrong about something. I knew that I understood something better than he did. Oh, I used to argue with him before. But that was mostly to show that I wasn't going to just agree with everything he said. But this time I knew he was wrong. He was staying in the army because he wanted to stay in the army, not because of duty or anything else. He liked the excitement of it. Oh, I guessed he was miserable a lot of the time when he was cold and hungry, and maybe being shot at. But still, he was part of something big. He thought what he was doing was important. It felt good to be part of it, and I knew that was the real reason why he didn't want to come home. Knowing that about Sam gave me a funny feeling. I didn't feel like his little brother so much anymore. I felt more like his equal. Okay, chapter 12. In June of that year, 1777, we found out that Father was dead. He'd been dead for a month. It had happened pretty much as we guessed it. He'd been sent to a prison ship in New York. There was one funny thing about it, though. It wasn't a rebel prison ship. It was a British ship, one. I never did figure out how that had happened. It had just come out of the confusion of the war somehow. It didn't much matter in the end, though. Those prison ships were terrible places. Filthy and baking hot in summer, and freezing in winter, and of course nothing but slop to eat. The worst part was disease. If anybody got sick with anything serious, everybody on the ship was liable to get it. That's what had happened to Father. They'd had an epidemic of cholera in the prison ship he'd been on. About 40 or 50 people had died from it, and he'd been one of them. Buried him someplace on Long Island, but we weren't sure where. Mother said, after the war, we'll find where he lies and have a headstone made for him. But I don't think even she believed we'd be able to do that. We found all this out from one of the men who'd been taken away during the raid on Reading that spring. He'd been put in the same ship, and he'd been with Father when he died. Before he died, he asked me to make sure you knew what had happened. He said, tell them I love them, and say that I forgive Sam. He's a brave boy, but he's headstrong. The last thing he said was, now I go to enjoy the freedom war has brought me. But Father wasn't the only one who died. 2 days after we found out about Father, Betsy Reed came down to the tavern. We gave her a pot of beer. Did you hear about Jeremiah Sanford? She said. No, he said. He's dead. Jerry? He's dead? Nobody understands it. They put him on a prison ship and he got sick and died in 3 weeks. It doesn't make any sense. You can understand why they took Mr. Rogers or Captain Betts, but why imprison a 10-year-old boy? What harm could he have done them? These wars turned men into animals, Mother said. He sunk his body in Long Island Sound in a weighted sack, Betsy said. So his parents can't even get him back. I don't understand it. What did they want him for? They're animals now. They're all beasts, Mother said. I think they are, Betsy said. Sam should have come home. It was the first time I'd ever heard her say anything against Sam and his ideals. I told him that, I said. He said he'd taken a pledge with some friends to stick it out till they won. Does he still think they're going to win? Betsy said. Maybe they will, I said. Betsy shook her head. Even Father says things are bad for the Patriots. I looked at her curiously. Don't you want them to win? I don't care who wins anymore. I just want it to be over. Sam wouldn't like you to talk like that. I don't care, she said. When I see him, I'm going to tell him. For 3 years they've been fighting, and all we've had is death and hunger. Your father is dead. Jeremiah Sanford is dead. Sam Barlow is dead. David Fairchild is dead. Stephen Fairchild was wounded. And more. My mother nodded. Right at the beginning, life said it would be that way. He said, in war, the dead pay the debts for the living. But he didn't think he would have to pay himself. So Father had forgiven Sam, and I think Mother did, although she never said so. But for myself, I wasn't sure. I knew I'd be glad to see him and have him at home. But still, I felt it was partly his fault that Father had died. Oh, he hadn't captured Father or thrown him in prison or given him Gloria or anything like that. But he was fighting on their side, and I couldn't easily forget about that. Yet, of course, it was a British prison ship he died on. It seemed to me that everybody was to blame, and I decided that I wasn't going to be on anybody's side anymore. Neither one of them was right. So summer passed and it became winter once more, and people were suffering worse than ever from want. Luckily, there wasn't any more fighting around Reading. Anyway, in the winter, they didn't fight much. Nobody liked to fight in the cold. And when there was snow on the ground, it was hard to march and easy to get sick. The Continental Army was encamped at a place called Valley Forge out in Pennsylvania somewhere. We didn't know whether Sam was there or not. From what we'd heard, they were practically starving and hadn't any clothes. I was just as glad. It made me hope that the rebels were at the end of their rope and would have to give up pretty soon and end this terrible war. I didn't even mind that Sam might be suffering with cold and hunger. It would serve him right. We were pretty hungry ourselves. Sam began writing us letters every once in a while, every 2 or 3 months, especially after he heard that Father was dead. He didn't tell us where he was in his letters. Mostly, they'd be about places he'd been. Sometimes Betsy would get a letter from him, too, and she'd come down to tell us about it. So time passed. The year 1777 ended and 1778 began. Spring came, and then summer and fall, and we harvested. Oh, how I hated the war. All of life was like running on a treadmill. I was 14. I should have been going to school all this while and learning something. Maybe by this time I would have begun to think about going to New Haven to study at Yale. I wasn't much interested in Latin or Greek, but in the last couple of years I'd learned a lot about buying and selling in the tavern business, and I wanted to study calculating and surveying and the agricultural sciences. I thought I might have a career in business. I might apprentice myself to a merchant in New Haven or New York, or even London, to learn the art of trade. Sam owed it to me to come home and help Mother run the tavern for a couple of years, while I started to make my way in the world. But until the war ended, there was nothing for me to do but tread water. Prices kept spiraling upward. Merchandise grew shorter and shorter in supply, and everybody seemed to be in debt. You couldn't refuse a hungry widow who'd lost her husband in the war some cloth or molasses on credit. But then how could we pay for new merchandise ourselves?